Hi, it's Tim Harness here. I want to tell you some stories about Bushy Park, which is a huge royal park in southwest London close to where I live. So these stories are going to connect the ancient manor of Hampton with the Knights of St John, Henry VIII, and later on General Dwight D. Eisenhower. It's a fascinating story, so stay with me and listen to it. Bushy Park is one of London's royal parks, which lies between the suburbs of Teddington and Hampton in southwest London. It covers over 1,000 acres, or about 400 hectares, and is a mixture of open grassland, woodland, ponds and protected gardens. It's very popular with local people who come to walk, cycle and partake in more vigorous exercise. It's the home of the original Park Run, which attracts over 1,000 runners every Saturday morning. Bushy Park as we see it now was created by Henry VIII, who lived next to the park at Hampton Court, the palace that Cardinal Wolsey happily gave to Henry in 1536. When the king is a psychopathic killer, it's best to do as he asks. Henry put a wall around the park and introduced some fallow deer and some red deer so that he could hunt them. Fallow deer are the smaller species, and there are some pure white ones which are very pretty. Red deer are Britain's biggest mammal and quite magnificent. Visiting Bushy Park is like a safari in Teddington. Because Henry the Wife Killer is such an important figure in British history, for most people the story of Bushy Park starts with him. But actually it goes back 500 years before Henry, and I want to tell you something about the connection between Bushy Park and the crusading Knights of St John in Valletta, the capital of Malta. After the Norman invasion in 1066, England was divided into parcels of land called manors. King William passed the manor of Hampton to Walter de St Valery. His descendants transferred the manor to a London merchant, Henry de St Albans, who sold it in 1237 to the Knights Hospitaller of St John of Jerusalem. The Hospital of St John in Jerusalem was built to treat sick pilgrims who travelled from Europe to visit the Christian sites in the Holy Land. The Knights' power and remit grew, and during the Crusades they became a military order whose role was to garrison castles, including the mighty Crac de Chevalier in Syria. The knights were often the younger sons of the nobility who weren't going to inherit titles and fancied a bit of overseas action. The Hospitallers eventually became a very powerful organisation, like the Holy Brothers in Arms, the Knights Templars. But building castles and running them was a very expensive business, so they needed a substantial income to do so. The knights were divided into different national chapters called langs, and the English lang was based at Clerkenwell Priory in what is now North London. The manor of Hampton was farmed to provide an income for Clerkenwell Priory. In 1338 they farmed 800 acres of arable land, 40 acres of meadow and pasture for 24 oxen, 18 cows and 2,000 sheep. The Knights Hospitaller were forced out of Jerusalem in 1291 and later took over the island of Rhodes. They were evicted from Rhodes in 1522 by the Ottoman Emperor Suleiman the Magnificent, and in 1530 took possession of the island of Malta, where a version of the order still exists to this day. The patterns of the medieval fields and the manor of Hampton are still there if you have the means to see them. Bushy Park has been scanned by aircraft using LiDAR. LiDAR stands for Laser Imaging Detection and Ranging. This technology uses laser light to scan the ground from an aircraft. It's a bit like radar but using light. These LiDAR images highlight all the slight differences in ground level in Bushy Park and clearly show all of the ancient field patterns. In the Middle Ages, fields were ploughed using oxen to pull the plough, between 2 and 8 of them in a team, depending on how heavy the soil was. The strip that they ploughed was called a furrow, and it would be roughly 220 yards long, which is called a furlong. This was roughly how much an ox could plough before it needed a rest. By the way, an ox is the same as a bullock, that is, a bull that has been castrated to make it more docile. The repeated ploughing of strips built them up into ridges with depressions in between. At the ends of the strips, headlands were created where the plough was turned. This aerial photograph shows a section of the park near the car park on Cobbler's Walk, opposite Bushy House. This LiDAR image shows the same area but highlights all the preserved ridges and furrows and headlands. This bit of video shows me cycling over some field strip ridges just to the south of the woodland garden. My wife is sat on a bench showing no interest at all in medieval history. I suppose it is a bit of a niche interest, so thanks for watching this video. In the 16th century, Protestant England was always under threat from Catholic France and Spain, so Henry had oak trees planted in his hunting park to provide timber for his ships. The oak saplings were protected from grazing deer by hawthorn bushes, and the park became known as Bushy Park. After Henry turned the medieval fields into a deer park, it mostly stayed the same for the next 400 years or so. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that the manorial records of Hampton were discovered in the library of the Knights of St John in Valletta in Malta. The story now jumps forward several hundred years to the 1940s. In 1942, 60 acres of Bushy Park became the headquarters of the American 8th Air Force and was called Camp Griffiths. The base was named after Lieutenant Colonel Griffiths, the first US airman killed in the line of duty in Europe. In 1943, General Eisenhower was placed in charge of the planning of the invasion of Europe. He took the opportunity to move out of his office in Grosvenor Square and into the more tranquil and safer surroundings of Bushy Park. Camp Griffiths became the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF. Eisenhower enjoyed the move, but his staff, who were used to hotel accommodation in central London, complained about the cold, dark offices of Camp Griffiths. Ike insisted it would help them appreciate the tough conditions that the Allied troops would find themselves in after the invasion of Europe. The camp also had an airstrip for small aircraft, which was sited where the children's playground is located, near the main car park. This aerial photo is missing some landmarks. The Diana Fountain and other ponds were drained and covered with camouflage netting so that they didn't provide navigation markers to German bombers. All of the Camp Griffiths buildings were cleared in the 1960s, but the site of Eisenhower's office is marked with a flagpole and a memorial to SHAEF. I hope you enjoyed those stories about Bushy Park. I'll finish with some shaky bicycle cam video that I shot yesterday morning. One hand on the handlebars and the other holding my phone. There will be more stories in another video.